Can you hear me now? Oh, let me know in the chat if you can hear me suddenly. Hey, we've got it. Johanna, Satish, is it working for you now? I also use Brave, and I was concerned that it was also going to mess me all up. Glad you were able to figure that one out. Let's see who we've got here. Okay. Okay, so we're all here. We can all hear each other. My goodness. Let's do this. Okay. So I want to welcome you to this little webinar called Lies Our Engineering Metrics Tell Us. I'm going to save my introduction till the end, so you can decide if you want to know more based on this talk. And the silly thing that we've all just kind of dealt with was, how do we use air meet? And in this case, the answer is poorly, but what I did want to draw your attention to is that in this chat panel, there is a Q&A button. It's the third button from the top of those buttons to the left of the chat panel. So if you want to put your questions in there, it'll keep them all organized and you can vote on them. And I'm going to save about 15 minutes for questions at the end. So I think it'll just help me out if you use that to put your questions. You can also promote questions that are in the chat into it, I believe. So if you like click on a bubble, it'll say like there's a little 3-dot thing and you can say, make it a question. But we'll figure that out later. So let's see if we can get this Q&A thing to work for us. So in the Q&A thing, I want you to put in there what question I can answer for you that would make this webinar worth your time. All right, I see Johanna's in there. And if you like Johanna's and you're like, that's good enough for me, you can do the little upvote thing too. That's how you can kind of float the questions that you really want answered up to the top. Which lie, small or large, makes the most difference? So while you all put these questions in, I'm going to go ahead and move on with what the rest of this talk is, because I scheduled this for 45 minutes. I have about 30 minutes of material and then 15 for Q&A. So I kind of got to hustle through it if I'm going to get to everything. But I will keep an eye on the chat and the questions as they go, and I'll try to pull that all in as I go, but I'm not going to make too many promises. So what's going to be in the talk? I'm going to cover some common examples of engineering metrics that don't typically do us the favors what they wish they did or outright mislead us. I'm going to unpack a little bit about what's going on behind each of those. I can't cover everything exhaustively in this short webinar, but I will cover at least one part about why those metrics don't work for us typically. And the last thing I want to get into is how might we go about start using a technique called signal mapping to get better at using metrics so they don't mislead us or cause confusion. So that's the content for the 30 minutes. And I do want to make sure I get as many of your questions as I can at the end, whether or not it was specific to this material or not. So let's talk about the tyranny of velocity. I pick on velocity first because it's probably the single most commonly used metric in engineering. And well, I wouldn't be surprised someone just rolled their eyes when I said velocity. And here's the thing, right? When we're in a leadership position, there are some serious questions we have to answer, right? So we have to answer questions about our capacity. Do we have the right amount of capacity? How much are we off by? Same thing for scheduling. Are we on time, ahead of schedule, behind? How off are we? Then there are questions that people don't like to admit that they use velocity for, like, do I have a bad apple on my team? Or how do I know my teams, how do I understand how they compare to one another? Or do I have a really good team or a really bad team? This kind of comparison thing. And velocity gets used for all of these. And the thing is, I have yet to really meet a single engineering leader who has used velocity for any of these and had confidence in what it said. And when that happens, when we don't have confidence in what our data is telling us, we have to fall back to our experience, our instinct, what what our boss tells us to do anyway, what someone we trust tells us, none of which are inherently bad, but we don't have data to support the decision anymore. We kind of have to just go forward. And velocity is the single most common metric that gets used by engineering leaders for all kinds of things, and it almost never gives confidence in the way we wish it did. Have you seen? I'm assuming you guys have seen this one. Let me know. Let me know if you've seen this before or felt this one. All right. Hey, found the reaction button. I love the reaction button. Okay, down at the bottom, there's a little emoji button. You can click it and make little things pop up. It's a quick way to play along and make the screen bubble. Also makes me feel good to see it. So next example, code coverage. Now code coverage is another really popular metric. If you haven't dealt with it in a long time or haven't seen it before, code coverage sorry, Johanna, when I said this one, do you mean like the reaction button? Oh, sure. So what I meant was in terms of using velocity to answer these kind of more important leadership questions. Have you seen that play out before, where we try to use it, but it doesn't give us confidence in the decisions we actually have to make or answering those questions? So code coverage. So code coverage is another popular metric. If you haven't dealt with it in a long time or haven't directly used it before, code coverage is uh, a metric that says how much of our code base is covered by automated tests. Now, what happens is it gets presented as, hey, we're going to use code coverage and we're going to try to hit this target of 80 to 85% coverage. And then what we see is that the quality in the code base has this quick spike of improvement, then it very rapidly tapers, and then over a long period begins to degrade. And what's frustrating about this for a lot of people is code coverage is meant to be one of these very well-known things to help improve quality, but it sometimes doesn't work out that way. Sometimes it does. And we'll talk about one of the major reasons why it doesn't work and what teams who use it successfully actually do. But code coverage is one of these that is can straight up lie to leaders and teams in terms of telling them that they're doing better than they are, while things actually are getting worse behind the scenes. I don't know if any of you have direct experience with code coverage, but this is one that when I see at a client, I can almost guarantee that there are going to be significant quality issues that I will have to remediate as a part of getting things back on track just because they've used code coverage. It's that misleading for most people and that dysfunctional. So last example, DORA metrics. I'm going to pick on DORA metrics for a minute. So DORA metrics are cycle time, mean time to recovery, change failure rate, and deployment frequency. And they have been popularized in the book Accelerate by Dr. Nicole Ferguson, part of the DevOps research. And they're not all that common in use, but they get discussed all the time. And they are popularized because you can benchmark high-performing organizations by these metrics. The problem is people don't really understand what's going on with them. And so if your cycle time went up, but your mean time recovery went down, is that good? Was that bad? Should we intervene? Should we do more of that? Like, is that trade worth it? The numbers wobble and move, but typically without much meaning. And so the numbers just sort of sit and move and don't inform us of anything in particular. They just kind of exist. So that's what I see happen regularly with DORA metrics. Have any of you seen DORA metrics get used in a material way or just as a, we have them, yay us? I'll talk about why it gets worse in a minute. Yeah, but we have them, gold star. Now I picked on these metrics and I don't want anyone to leave this webinar saying with me thinking that I've said to you that these are bad metrics and you shouldn't use them. That is not what I'm trying to communicate. What I am trying to communicate is that while metrics are just numbers, what we do with them typically makes them valuable or not valuable or even straight up mislead us. So all of these metrics have value. All of them can be used successfully. They just rarely are. I use all of them quite regularly in my consulting work, and it's fine. But there are dysfunctions that are very easy to fall into with them. And now I'm going to kind of talk about what's going on with some of these examples. And I can't be exhaustive because we just have a short amount of time, but I am going to cover a little bit about what's going on. So let's talk about the velocity example. So velocity is one of these interesting examples that to me exhibits this phenomenon in a lot of companies with a lot of leaders, which is to say they tend to gravitate towards the metrics that are easy to get to and easy to use. And velocity came kind of installed with every agile tool as a part of the whole agile industry for the past couple decades. We all were told to use velocity and it became just right there. And we were also told that we can use it for all these great things. But we also experienced that it didn't work out. For a very long time, we have felt the problem that it doesn't answer the questions we really need it to answer. But because it's there, because it's easy to use, we keep twisting velocity into these capacity, scheduling, and performance-shaped holes, even though it doesn't really work. We just keep doing it. It's right there. We ought to use it problem. So one of the things I want to point out is to try to avoid the tendency of using a metric that's wrong for the job, especially because it's right there. Like that's a common velocity failure mode is we'll just use velocity for this, and when it doesn't work out, like, oh well, but it's right there. We'll try again. This time we'll use it and it'll work. But it doesn't. Just never does. And it's a common trend to just use what's easily accessible, even if it's a bad fit. Now I assume most people are going to have other things they've seen and experienced about why velocity doesn't work out. By all means, share your experience in the chat because I can only cover like a slice of things as I go. Code coverage. Code coverage is actually a really big example. We could spend a lot of time unpacking this one. But what I am going to focus on is this concept of leading and lagging indicators. And while I consider that to be really, I always assume people know about leading and lagging indicators, but then I keep bumping into the reality that most people seem to not have a good grasp of it. So leading and lagging indicators work like this. Leading indicators are something you can see today that we hope leads to a result tomorrow. So in the case of code coverage is a leading indicator to quality. So the lagging result is that quality will be improved if code coverage is improved. That's how they pair up, leading and lagging. And the other thing about leading and lagging indicators is leading indicators don't force the result. They're more like a correlation, a dotted line, a influence, which means it may or may not work out that way. There's lots of reasons why it may or may not. But if you don't watch for your result that you want, you probably aren't going to see it happen. You have to see if that influence holds. And what happens with code coverage over and over and over again is that code coverage is treated as a sort of self-contained thing. It is presented by leaders and groups as saying, we're going to use code coverage, we're going to hit 80 to 85%. The goal is of itself. There is no lagging result. It's not discussed, it's not tracked, it's not measured, it's not seen. We chopped off quality. So the entire point when code coverage gets used most of the time is to make the 80 and 85% target. That's the point. But here's the thing. When we chop off that lagging result, people have to have a reason why something is happening. They have to know why they're doing something. In the absence of saying we're doing code coverage to improve quality, they have to create their own reason. They have to create their own implication to it. So what people hear when they say we're going to do code coverage and get to 80 to 85%, when they hear that, they then create the meaning, I need to get to 80 to 85% at all costs, or bad things happen. So the lagging result is I get punished. So now I'm going to do code coverage to not get punished. And this happened because we never said quality was important. So what happens? People begin to make that target, trend towards that target. They begin to write automated tests that are the easy ones to write. We see a quick spike in quality improve. But then the tests get harder to write. So we stop writing the easy tests. And so the tests stop being ones that naturally improve quality, and they start being ones that only improve coverage. And it looks like quality stalls. But what's really happening is we are now adding to our systems and everything, a bunch of artifacts and code and everything that only make a code coverage number exist in the right capacity and do nothing for anything else. So over a longer period of time, we begin to see quality is actually declining. And this happens because when people are deploying their systems and there are breaks and hot fixes and people are like, I don't understand, why is this happening? The team says sheepishly, well, we don't know if our deploys are any good. And they don't know their deploys are good because their tests passing don't mean anything anymore, because their tests are there to make the code coverage number high, not to test their code. And if a test fails, that doesn't mean anything's wrong, because the test could fail only because it's only working against coverage, not necessarily that it's testing anything meaningful. And so to pursue a code coverage target, we have eroded our ability to manage quality at the same time. And that's why quality decreases over time, because code coverage has become a self-fulfilling prophecy of hit the number at all costs. There's a whole lot more we can talk about with this one, but my sort of short guidance is, if you're going to use a leading indicator, you need to also use the lagging result. If you do not have both, dysfunction will happen in the absence of it. And that's what happens a lot of times with code coverage. DORA metrics. So I hinted at this before. So DORA metrics are typically installed because this is what high-performing teams do. There's no meaning to them. The meaning was you check a box, we have them. And so when the numbers move, fluctuate, and oscillate, we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to interpret them. They inform nothing to us. They become just noise in more dashboards and reports. And I'll talk a bit about how we use data, and this hopefully will become more clear as to why DORA metrics, which have been heavily researched and heavily used, fail to mean or be useful to us. It's because of our how we are not well equipped to use data. So that's the DORA case. It's just the whole point was because we can, not because it informs the thing. That doesn't mean it has to be that way, but that's the way it works out. So now we're going to get into the actual what you can take away from this, other than whining about metrics. how to actually use them, or at least a nugget about it. So I'm going to put forward that I'm going to say there's 3 primary ways we can use data. And the first case is investigation. And this is where most leaders that I have seen fall. Investigation, using data for investigative purposes, is in this mode of saying, I want to be around a lot of data to see what patterns and insights emerge, right? Cast a real wide net, big dashboards, lots of metrics, and we hope pattern and insight reveal itself to us. The problem with this is that it's costly, takes time, and you may never have pattern and insight emerge. DORA metrics are here for most of us. We hope it reveals some truth to us, but it often won't. So investigation is a totally legitimate use case for data, but it's a pretty error-prone and costly way for it to be a default. So the next way data is typically used is for operational use, or like health checks. And the best analogy I can give for why this typically doesn't work, right? Because operational is still another dashboard, just like the investigation. They're both it's the same dashboard, but it's the way in which we try to use them that makes a difference. So I want to use the example of a thermometer for operational metric. Like a thermometer we would use to tell us if we're sick. So a thermometer that we would use has all the numbers on it, right? So you can see all your temperatures all the way up to some fine degree. But the reality is, we know that once you get above your 98.6, you have a fever. You're likely sick. And we know that once you get above 104, you're real sick and probably ought to go to the doctor, right? A perfectly legitimate thermometer would be no numbers and just say, not sick, fever, go to the doctor. We put all the numbers there, but we know the thresholds that we watch for that prompt us to act on those thermometers, because we've been taught to do this. Operational metrics, the way most companies do this, have no such thresholds. They're just numbers. They don't know what line has to be crossed that would prompt anything. And without that specific threshold concept, we fall back to investigation, where we hope patterns emerge that we can act on. But what's missing for most operational style of usage is knowing what boundaries need to be set. And it can be tricky to set them. If you really want to nerd out about this subject, you could read Out of the Crisis by Edward Deming, and he'll get into how to use control charts for statistical process control, and creating a rolling average, and then creating thresholds at 3 standard deviations that prompt immediate action. That's not how you should do it all the time, but as he did this a lot for as like the grandfather of lean for manufacturing. So there are ways to formally set thresholds correctly, but most leaders are not equipped to do this, and so it falls into investigation by default. And DORA metrics would typically be operational, but we would have to know what the lines are around them that give them meaning. When our cycle time moves below a point, something has happened, or above a point, something has happened. But if it's in this range, we're all good. The last case, and this is the case I'm going to spend the rest of the talk on, is decisions. Data that specifically prompts us to act. Signals. We want a signal that drives us to act. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about signal mapping. It's nothing revolutionary, but it's a pretty powerful concept. So here's how you signal map. You need to identify the decisions that you have to make as a leader. Don't worry about being complete. Don't worry about being exhaustive. Don't worry about if they're the most important decisions, the most frequent decisions. Doesn't matter. Just get a list of your decisions together. There is benefit to saying decisions that you have to make regularly, because you'll get more practice. But other than that, just get the list. Do what you can. 10, 15 is fine. The next thing you're going to do is, for each of these metrics, or not the metrics, sorry, each of your decisions, you're going to go through and ask, what would I need to see that would make me act? Make me make this decision? What would I need to see that would force me to make the decision? And this is a paralyzing question, because it assumes you would know what you would need to see. And people get paralyzed because they're afraid of picking the wrong thing, an imperfect thing, a indefensible thing. And I'm going to tell you that all that is made up. You can use completely subjective and qualitative things because all you're really doing is creating something that indicates to you that you need to act. You're not creating some exhaustive researched version of this that has been proven over and over again. You just need enough that acts as an indicator for you to move. And that could be very subjective. I can give you an example of this at the end, but you'll probably have to remind me to say it because I forget every time I do this talk. So if you want an example of one of these, I'll do that at the end. So you're going to come up with your what I would need to see that would cause me to act. And it could be a metric, it could be something that you're just listening for. But once you hit that thing, you act. And as soon as you act, as soon as this thing triggers, you're going to begin to receive feedback on it. And I don't mean that necessarily from your peers, because you can do this privately. You don't have to expose your list of decisions and signals. But you're going to see feedback in the sense that the trigger is going to go off. You know you're supposed to act, and you're either going to be like, "Yeah, I nailed it," or more likely you're going to be thinking, "I'm not sure." And you get to go back and ask the second question. Well, what else would I need to see that would cause me to act? And this moment of hesitation is going to cause you to refine what signals you've developed. And I want to point out that it's not the feeling of hesitation that is correct. The feeling of hesitation is a signal in of itself. And why I want to bring this up is that moment where you have to act and then decide if you were at the right moment of acting is how you're going to develop this sense of how these metrics and signals really play into things, what connections exist. But I want to point out a bit more about that our feelings are a signal, but not necessarily truth. So I want to take the case of a leader that spends most of their day in firefighting mode, constantly dealing with crisis, one big deal after another. It's just always emergencies. They probably don't love that. So they might approach me for signal mapping. And the whole point is to get out of firefighting mode. So they want to develop useful signals to prompt action to prevent crisis. Fair enough. So we develop some signals, they begin to go off, and immediately the leader is going to feel like this is not working because there isn't a crisis. They'll feel like they're taking action when there's no reason to act. But that feeling of saying this isn't working is really misleading because the whole point is that there isn't supposed to be a crisis, but they've been hardwired to expect it. So their feelings about it are completely wrong about this isn't working. When the reality is they should be acting before the crisis. When there is no crisis is when they're acting to prevent them. So their feelings are still a useful signal, but they're not truth. And so you use the feeling as a signal to refine what you're doing, but not to let those intuitions guide you because they are very likely to be wrong. And that's part of how change works is your feelings are usually going to be a signal, but not truth. So that's signal mapping. And that is also more or less the end of my material. So I'm going to close with my little introduction. So you can go to my website and read all kinds of stuff I've written, including more about signals and measures and everything else at my website, ryanlauda.com. I do publish a weekly newsletter on leadership topics, product management, technical craft, and beekeeping. And Esther Derby, the wonderful Esther Derby, and I are going to be partnering to offer workshops to leadership teams where we will come to your leadership team and spend several days equipping them to use metrics to drive action as opposed to struggling with it like they typically are. So if that's something that you think your leadership teams or you as a leader would be interested in, Esther and I would love to talk to you to see if that's a good fit. And you can reach out to me at ryan@ryanlauda.com. But let's move on to your questions. So go ahead and add the ones you want, upvote the ones that are the best, and we will plow through them. And it looks like the highest one is yours, Johanna, with what's the biggest, most impactful lie that I see in engineering metrics typically. I think, let me think about the ones I deal with all the time. I think the most common, the biggest lie that I think everyone buys into all the time, so much so that I think they're blind to it, is that their estimates are going to be useful and accurate. Um, Everyone knows they're wrong. No one knows by how much. Everyone pads and hedges because it is so ubiquitous that we do all the theater around estimation, but we all know it's bunk. We all know it's wrong. And so we hesitate on the decisions around scheduling and capacity and scope because we're not sure. But I think people are like, it's so normalized that we don't know what else it would ever look like. Um, I think that's probably the single biggest one I see all the time. It doesn't mean it has to stay that way. It's just, convincing people that you don't have to be on fire all the time is crazy when you've always been on fire. Um, let's see. And going down the list, if I get another, which lie, small or large, makes the most difference? Um, which lie makes the most difference? I think in terms of like engineering metric ones that come up a lot, I'm going to give kind of two answers because I could kind of go either way on this one. So code coverage, I'm going to go back to as a like that can cause years of harm for months of effort, and it is not always obvious to people that that's what can happen, um, and it can be really hard to undo and fix because this is deep in their code that they've basically undid their good stuff to artificially hit a number. Um, and no one wants to admit it. No one wants to own up to it. And what's more, the culture that created is likely going to recreate it again. So that was a thorny one to deal with, and I've dealt with it for years. The other one, I think, in a kind of an inverted way, is Dora metrics. Because I always think it's really funny, the whole like, we're going to have Dora metrics because we all read Accelerate. Now we're going to be high performing. And then you have these kind of orphaned metrics hanging out there. But at the same time, Dora metrics are very sound and very useful when you know how to use them. And so they could be this stepping stone to like incredible change if they can take the next step. So it's like I don't know, like if it was a movie, it's like the hero with the artifact they need to beat the bad guy, but they didn't realize it. Like that one's always really funny to me. Satish, you had your question about then it gets worse. Why? I think I answered that one, but if not, let me know in the chat and I'll get into that a little more. Martina, how do we know whether a metric actually correlates with business value instead of just activity? So I think that one probably has to be unpacked a little bit more. So most of the time, most organizations focus on leading indicators without their lagging pair. So we talk a lot about activity-based stuff, estimation, quote, business value, but before anything could be realized. And the only way you know if it correlated is you have to go check at the end. And so that's it. Take the step to check. So you can get quite skilled at using estimates. You can get quite skilled at using business value. You can get quite skilled at all these things, but you do have to come back and check the results. A story about this. So this is a long time ago now, but I was at a company where we had a very, very smart director of engineering who was also like really thoughtful about how to do things. And he was becoming concerned that our product group was talking about business value, business value, business value, but there was nothing behind it. And our backlogs were all growing, all this sort of like, showmanship around everything, but our company was failing. And so he instituted a rule that no work would make it to the engineering teams unless he called it the nutritional value, like the back of a food package with a nutritional label. He said that like anything, any large feature had to have this nutritional label associated to it. And it would have to have what the expected result of the work would be, including when we would be able to check. And over time, we began to see that, yeah, there were no results ever. And slowly, this began to change perception of which product managers were serious about their jobs and which product managers just wanted to show off. And that slowly began to reallocate which products were given to which product managers, because some were only going to do the razzle dazzle flash show, and some were actually going to present results at the end. And it was because this director forced this, tell me why you think this is going to work, did it. He would come back to see the results. So that's kind of my long answer about how do you know if it's activity or it correlates? You go and check. And usually you don't need permission to check most of the stuff. You could just go do it, but it's going to be a confrontation when you bring up the like, and here's the data. Like, people don't usually want to hear that side. I will say this though, I do think there's a missing opportunity for most leaders to embrace that moment of things aren't going right, and here's the data to show it's not going right. Because when they fix it, they have such a wonderful story of we went from here to here. Whereas most leaders try to suppress or not draw attention to the unfortunate sides of reality, which dampens the whole story of look at how much we've improved. Like, show the gap. It's fine, own it. It makes the story better, but people want to sleep on that one. How will AI change the way we interpret engineering metrics? Oh man, okay. So I want to be careful with this. So I'm going to talk about LLMs specifically, since that's what's more or less on the market and people talk about. LLMs will be able to quickly access metrics, present them. It will not do a good job of interpreting them or understanding them. That's not me saying, oh, because it's not mature yet. That's me saying that because LLMs as a technique have serious limitations that you cannot overcome. There's no feature that will fix it. So in terms of their ability to get through data and show it back to you, great. I mean, all those people that have to build, PowerPoint decks and Power BI dashboards, yeah, AI can do that work. In terms of creating meaning and driving action from it, I don't think I would trust AI with that. It's just a limitation of LLMs. It cannot think and it cannot reason, which means those numbers will not carry meaning to it in a meaningful way. Do I think people are going to try to do that anyway? Absolutely. But then again, most people are struggling with metrics today, so why not offload that burden to something else that also will struggle with metrics? A great example of like something simple. Most of the time, your AI stuff doesn't know what day it is or what time it is. So if you ask it to like tell you what the biggest trend in data is for the past 3 months, it may not know what the past 3 months are. That doesn't mean it won't give you an answer, but this idea that it's going to think through problems the way we would is categorically not true. So puzzling about data and reasoning about it is not something I would trust LLMs with. That doesn't mean you can't go fetch it for you and dig it up, that kind of thing. Great, but the meaning side and decisions, I wouldn't think so. We have 1 minute left. I hope you found this webinar useful. The recording will be available. I believe, I thought I had a recording option here. If not, I'll record the talk again and send it back out. But if you have any other last minute questions, please send them to me. If you have any other thoughts afterwards, you can email me and I'm happy to talk more. But thank you very much. And I will speak to all of you soon, I hope. Oh, there it is, the example, the signal example. Okay. So here's the thing about, here's the signal example, because I mentioned you don't have to be very scientific about it. You just have to use something that prompts action. And over time, the feedback will tell you whether it's useful. So quite a lot of times in my work, when I'm building out engineering teams and all that stuff, I have to keep an eye on like sentiment. Like, are we happy? Are we okay? Are people about to quit? And that's kind of a loosey goosey, fuzzy thing. But it's one of the places that I first started using signal mapping. So I will have one on ones with people pretty regularly, usually like once a week. I'll have one on ones with folks. And one of the things I've just institutionalized myself is I track the overall sentiment of the one on one. And basically, what I'll do is I'll say that if over half of the population express the sentiment of wanting another job, then I take action on that as there is a serious morale issue that I need to act on now. Um, would I stand up and say this is how you should all do it? No, but I have found that it is very useful to me. And yes, I'll bring it up to my client and leadership. I'm like, hey, by the way, I think there's a morale problem. Here's how I know. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. People would tell me if there was something wrong. No, they won't. And so I will just get to work on it, and I will begin to try to figure out why morale is so bad, and then I will try to address it. Because I don't want people to quit while I'm there and trying to improve things, because it's not a fun thing to go through, and it can be addressed. So my signal is half of my one-on-ones express the sentiment of, oh, I don't know, like, is this the right fit? Maybe I should be somewhere else, like that kind of thing. Then something's wrong, and I act. It's not scientific, but it's a signal. And all it is sentiment. Like, do I hear this coming up in my one-on-ones? Does that make sense? Yeah. And I wanted to give that example because people get all hung up about like, oh, is it statistically significant? And they don't know what that means, or it's not enough data points. But worry about that kind of formality when you are good enough to invite that kind of formality. Like, important thing is to get movement and get practice, not provably correct, because that's not really a thing. Cool. Thank you, everyone, again. And I will send out the link of recording if it doesn't work, or re-record and send that to you. So thank you again.